Hi, everyone. I'm Henna Maria. It is such an honor to speak alongside so many trailblazing, beautiful thinkers, teachers, and healers from across the world. So thank you to everyone who made this event possible. And thank you to you for tuning in right now. Did you know that the spiritual archetype of the activist is actually a healer? This is why I want to explore the deeper, esoteric principles for healing humanity. So I invite you to take this contemplative journey with me, to expand your perception, to deepen your knowledge, or perhaps to remind you of the truth that already lives within you. We cannot win this war on the grounds of the enemy. We must take ourselves beyond the battlefield and transcend the warring mentality. Upon examining the etymology of the word war, we come to find that the ancient Germanic root of this word meant to confuse. Therefore, the greatest remedy is truth, bringing clarity into the maze of lies which cause us to forget our true nature. The ancients have discovered 8 immutable and eternal principles which govern the universe, also known as natural law. I will now explore these spiritual principles one by one, some in greater and some in less depth, for the purpose of discovering the causes and remedies for our collective malady. The 8 principles of natural law are mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, gender, and the one principle that gives life to them all. Let us start with mentalism, which states the all is mind. The universe is mental. When I first discovered this principle, I had a bit of trouble digesting it because I've always perceived the mind to be inferior to the heart. Surely the universe stems from the infinite well of the heart. But the more I contemplated the meaning of the axiom, the universe is mental, the more I understood the undeniable mental dimension of creation. Perhaps there is indeed another impulse first, one that we will go to later, as it is the last and the lost principle. But as mentalism is often called the first Hermetic principle, let us start by examining it in the context of creation as it pertains to a human being. In order for us to manifest anything, we must first have it appear as a thought, as an idea. This is true both for conscious and unconscious creation. What do I mean by conscious and unconscious creation? In conscious creation, we have awareness of our thoughts being the building blocks of our process of manifestation. For example, we think rigorously how we can solve a particular problem. We apply logic and reason in the truth discovery process. We envision things when we explore a path to bring something into reality. In unconscious creation, however, we are not aware of how our thoughts have influenced our manifested state of being, be it mood or behavior. We may harbor unconscious beliefs about ourselves and about life, which directly affect our response to a certain situation. As we are creator beings made in the image of the great creator, we create whether we like it or not, whether we want to or not. This is the grand responsibility that has been bestowed on each and every single one of us. So what if these thoughts, which reside below the confines of our conscious mind, were creating disharmony and chaos, harming our lives, or worse yet, the lives of others? What if there existed certain groups of individuals in this world whose sole mission was to deliberately trigger these harmful beliefs and even plant hostile thoughts into the collective unconsciousness? Now we begin to enter the territory that is crucial for an accurate diagnosis of our current state of of affairs. The principle of mentalism is absolutely essential in comprehending the behavior of the individual as well as the behavior of the collective. Most of our harmful beliefs and behavioral patterns originate from trauma. The social engineers who sit at the tables of the Tavistock Institute, Davos, and the likes are absolutely aware of this fact. And this is why most everything we hear or see in the media is traumatizing on some level. And when the trauma program has become normalized and fully embodied, we live in a permanent state of trauma response. When our fear-stained, externally implanted thoughts are superimposed on the genuinely harmless environment around us, we literally see what our thoughts are narrating us to see, regardless of their validity or veracity. We begin to see the pandemic around us, which the newscasters have implanted into our minds. Our perception is the direct creation of our thoughts. This is the principle of mentalism in effect. So if we do not cultivate awareness, self-awareness, we are not familiar with the thoughts that govern our mind. And if we do not know our thoughts, we cannot recognize the mental offspring which they create. This is at the core of the age-old maxim, know thyself. If the thoughts that create our lives are not from our own choice or from our conscious creation, if we do not inhabit that seat of consciousness, someone else will gladly take over, guaranteed. We must declare that seat of power, or better yet, sanctify it for the Holy One, so that the infinite mind can live at the center of our minds, and that all the thoughts that are born within us would be inspired through the divine. If we leave that seat vacant, a spirit of darkness may take it, and thus generate thoughts which ensure its continuous reign. So, for instance, if we believe we are powerless and weak, if our minds are bombarded with this belief system, we will act based on that belief and make disempowered choices. And we will forever be held hostage by that limiting belief system and all of the suffering that comes along with it. Pain is a portal to transmutation and spiritual growth, but suffering, meaning endless cycles of negative patterns, self-abandonment, victimhood, serve no one but the spirits of darkness. If, however, we practice self-inquiry and explore the root causes of our behavioral patterns, we come to recognize these false beliefs and we can begin to rewrite them. So instead of believing I am powerless and weak, I could say I grew up in an environment which never nourished my will center. My family did not enable me to grow and exercise my inner power, and that led me to believe that I was weak. However, in truth, I am actually not weak. I'm simply lacking practice. Now I'm an adult and I'm no longer living in that unsafe environment, so I can be free to exercise my will. I can start practicing. See how different that feels from that belief of I am powerless and weak? Alternatively, the mental reflection may look like this. I recognize that I am once again repeating the pattern of an unsupportive loved one who is constantly dominating me and not respecting my free will despite numerous attempts for me to communicate my boundaries. This is why I once again feel powerless and weak, but I know I am actually not powerless and weak. So I choose not to be a victim of this situation. As a child, I could not influence my environment, but now I can. I recognize I chose this relationship for I was still unconsciously attracted to the same family dynamic of domination. However, I have learned my lesson now, and I'm ready to grow out of this pattern by choosing to leave this partnership. And we can take the same example from the micro to the macro, from the one to the whole. Right now, our communities, our societies, our countries are embodying that very same limiting belief system of I am powerless and weak. For we have grown up in an abusive system. And since this powerlessness is simply a normal state of being for the people right now, they do not recognize it as a problem. It is simply a fact of life. I mean, just think, how many times have you heard someone saying, I can't do it alone, or one person cannot change anything, as an excuse when given an opportunity to enact a positive change in society? It is the very belief that creates paralysis and apathy. Even in the midst of an obvious government tyranny, people simply obey as they have accepted their role as the dominated one, the eternal victim. The first step getting out of a toxic relationship of dominance is recognizing the dynamic, that the relationship is not respecting your free will. The government is not even asking your preference. It's simply ordering you. It's sheer coercion. So rather than having people believe I'm powerless and weak, we can inspire the realization that you are powerful. You have simply been living in a society which has been dominating you from birth. And thus you have come to believe that your thoughts and preferences don't matter, that your wishes and needs don't matter. But this is wrong. They do matter. You matter. Your life matters. And you have the power to leave this toxic relationship of dominance. And when you have pulled your vital force out of this cycle of dominance, you can begin to re-examine yourself as a being. You are not a slave. You are a creator. This is why peaceful gatherings, conscious festivals, and sacred ceremonies are so dangerous to the class of dominators, because it's an opportunity for us to experience a glimpse of a life without government. And when you get a taste of that freedom, you can begin to get a taste of your true self. You can begin to envision what our societies could become as well. So it is due to this oppressive control grid that we've been living in that most people have never discovered their true self. Their lives are so far away from the way that they'd love to live that they've lost themselves along the way as well. Exhausted and run down, terrorized by the media and the government, programmed from birth to believe that they are powerless and that their lives are meaningless. Every free will choice dominated and destroyed by the powers that shouldn't be. And hey, we have a perfectly natural response here. The masses could have not acted in any other way, given the mental ingredients that govern their behavior. So you see, it is all about the mind and the mental offspring. This is why the most important job of the activists in the freedom movement is to transmit a signal which has the ability to activate the true essence of humanity, to empower them. This is why also the choice of our words is of utmost importance. For with our message, we generate thoughts and beliefs. And with beliefs, we generate behavior. And with behavior, we generate change, for better or for worse. The second principle of natural law is correspondence. As above, so below. As within, so without. As the universe, so the soul. This principle embodies the truth that there is always a correspondence, a similarity, a parallelism, a resemblance, a comparability between the laws and phenomena of various planes of being and life. This is also the master key to exploring the unseen realms, for our universe is fractal. By observing and deeply comprehending a basic phenomenon, we can apply this same knowledge to comprehending higher realities, more complex phenomena. Just as we did with the principle of mentalism, understanding how the behavior of an individual is created through his thoughts, we could conclude that the behavior of the collective is similarly created through the collective worldview and the dominant narrative which the collective had adopted, the dominant thought. This is why the student of the healing arts must first learn to heal themselves, as their journey of healing is the training to facilitate healing for others. Likewise, the activists in the freedom movement must first begin their journey by exploring the true meaning of freedom and practicing it in their own life so that they can begin to see what freedom for the collective would require, what it must look like. Again, to do this, we can begin at any level, but I like to start at examining things where they are at their most simple, where there is the least amount of variables present for the effect of the law to become as clear as possible. Of course, to fully comprehend the laws in effect in any phenomena, we must be able to examine all of the principles of natural law at once. But as that requires an extremely advanced mind and a very high level of consciousness, it is easier for us to examine things one by one, focus on the principles one by one, while of course bearing in mind that the other principles are simultaneously in effect as well, with equally strong influence. So actually they are all completely intertwined, interconnected, and in communication. So to look at the principle of correspondence in a relationship, which should be based on free will, but which still contains the condition that some are less capable of looking after themselves, how do we ascertain that everyone is as free as possible? I will use the example of a human relationship with an animal companion, a dog in this case. So what is the societal norm in this relationship? Firstly, the human being believes themselves to be the owner of the dog. He or she has bought the dog and sees the dog to be their property, their pet. Rather than exploring the natural preferences of the dog as a unique being, the owner imposes their ideas for how the dog should behave in order to become their pet. Rather than modifying his living environment to suit the life of a dog, the owner forces the dog to adapt to his environment, even if it is absolutely in opposition to the natural environment of a dog. The owner feeds the dog whatever is convenient for them to get a hold of, not really considering what would be the natural diet of the dog. The owner takes the dog out for a walk when it suits him, using a leash, controlling the pace, the behavior, and the parameters of how far the dog is allowed to go to explore his surroundings. And when the owner is finished, the dog too must come indoors. The dog is trained with treat or punishment mentality. If you do well, you get a goodie. You get positive attention. If you do badly, you get smacked or humiliated. An outcome of a successful training is believed to be when the dog obeys all orders without any resistance. And even more advanced is the dog who volunteers to do what the owner wants out of their own accord. This is a being who has essentially lost all of their natural instincts, who has learned to be an extension of the desires of the owner, who is the embodiment of the pet, not a companion, with their own free will, who is in a dignified and respectful care of a human being. The pet has been trained to abandon their true self completely to fit into the requirements of the owner. If the dog has a strong will and does not particularly conform very well to the control of his so-called owner, the dog is believed to be difficult. He's believed to have a defective character. And if he is quote unquote untrainable, he may be abandoned or even killed. The dog also gets injected and chipped in the name of health. And when he begins to suffer from the diseases of the modern human being as a consequence to his completely unnatural life and diet, the conditions are treated with the same drugs that the modern humans get treated with. Namely, shutting down the signals of the dis-ease for better management and less uncomfortable whining and complaining. When the drugs eventually poison the dog and the expenses of his medical treatment become too high for the owner, the dog is recommended to receive a lethal shot, and he is put to sleep. The principle of correspondence shows us how the nature of a dominant relationship is true in all levels of being. In this case, we have observed dominance in the relationship between a human and his animal companion. But what is unhealthy and harmful for the dog in this relationship will also be harmful for the human in a relationship with an entity which believes themselves to be his owner. Like the relationship between a slave and a slave master, or a citizen and a government. One could also take it to the higher realms, the spiritual plane, and see that the same dynamic would be equally true between a spirit of darkness and their host, which they have possessed. So if the dog is the metaphor for a child who needs a caretaker, we can understand that some of the control imposed on the dog is genuinely for their own good and for the good of the harmony of the family. So for instance, a dog should not bite anyone, same as a child should not hit anyone, unless be it for their self-defense. A biting dog or a hitting child should receive a firm boundary, of course, to be shown that their behavior is harmful. But to have a balanced child who is free to express their true nature, or to have a balanced dog who is free to express his true nature, the control should be countered with a lot of genuine freedom and loving care. So if the dog has to behave a certain way inside the house, perhaps outside in nature, he can run around free without a collar or a leash, rolling in the mud and chasing birds. For the child to become a grounded human being, connected with the earth and all of her creatures in a respecting, loving manner, we cannot raise him in front of a television screen or an iPad. So if we cannot provide a natural, healthy living environment for a puppy to become a dog with natural instincts, or a child to become a human adult with natural instincts, we should consider restructuring our lives in order to be able to provide as much of that environment as possible, in order to enable them to grow into their true being and to develop their natural senses. Confinement and control creates loss of self in both cases. And as a result of that societal programming, we have either a perfectly obedient pet, a perfectly obedient citizen, or a so-called difficult pet and a so-called dysfunctional citizen. By understanding these examples with the principle of correspondence, we can conclude that there can be no balanced outcome ever from a dynamic that is based on domination. This takes me to another dimension of the principle of correspondence, balance. Let us explore the meaning of this word a little bit. We all know that balance is a requirement for our well-being on all levels. For our physical health to be in balance, all vital organs must function properly. For us to have financial balance, we must be able to provide for ourselves and cover the cost of our living. For us to have emotional balance, we must be able to express our emotions freely, receive resonance for them in reciprocity, while not being controlled by the emotions alone. So balance does not mean equal measure of good and bad. Although some people do justify the existence of evil by saying that it is a part of the divine balance. But we know this not to be true by the principle of correspondence. If nature always seeks to be in balance, her balance does not mean that half of the rainforests must be dead and dying and half the rivers dry. If a human seeks to be in balance, they seek for all of the areas of their lives to be in harmony. They do not want an equal measure of suffering and joy. They do not seek half of their friends to be loving and half to be abusive. Balance in creation is like balance in nature. Death in nature only has a purpose if it is a constituent of creation. Same is true for death in life. This is the sacred darkness, which is in total harmony with natural law. A fruit must die for the seeds to be spread. A seed must break for the sapling to break through and grow. Same way, a relationship which does not serve us must break for us to make room for new growth. In the darkness of the night, many creatures find shelter. Same way, in the darkness of grief, many of us seek and find shelter in the divine. However, there is darkness in this world which has no place in creation, which has spiraled out of the divine balance and serves nothing and no one. It is a creation of the fall. It does not cause growth. It does not act as a portal of transmutation. It does not facilitate the birth of another. It only destroys, and it recognizes no boundaries. To it, nothing is sacred. And it is consciously in direct opposition to natural law and all of the divine creation. In nature, we could call it an artificially created poison, which has the potential to destroy all the waters of the earth. It is so toxic that even the organic intelligence of the earth cannot respond to it. That the earth in all of her might cannot recover from it, but becomes totally void of all life. The earth will not die completely, but her expression will have become completely diminished and her form will have become almost unrecognizable. It is a death of a sort. The same is true for the human soul. If poisoned enough, the life of the soul withers away. What do you think happens if the human consciousness becomes dominated and hijacked by the artificial intellect? I refuse to call it intelligence, by the way, because it lacks the generative principle of creation, which the archontic machine consciousness can never replicate, can never even come close to, can never generate. If we know that the child loses all of her instincts and senses through control, confinement, and mental programming, what happens to the soul if it never gets to express itself? What happens to our ability to feel if our only reality is an artificially projected metaverse? Does our soul become embodied at all? Would it linger around in a sea of lost souls, unable to get anchored on this plane of being? What is our purpose in this creation? It is definitely not to allow our beautiful earth to be destroyed. And it's definitely not to allow the beautiful soul of humanity to be destroyed either. Therefore, we must be unapologetic in our commitment to protect that which is sacred, with the knowledge that the darkness we are observing now, this dominance, is a spiritual sickness, a distortion, which must be casted out once and for all. And anyone who tries to justify its existence here by speaking of balance is just as mistaken as someone who tries to justify poison in the drinking water. It does not belong there. The third principle of natural law is vibration, which stipulates nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. This law embodies the truth that everything is simply different modes, degrees, and rates of vibration. You could call it life. Everything is alive, and we can feel the nature of whatever being, event, or signal by its vibratory essence. We know how the presence of a highly vibrating human being also lifts our own vibration. Therefore, we ourselves must also be able to alter the vibratory state of our being and of our thoughts. It is a choice, and it's all about rewriting that choice into our consciousness. But it's important not to confuse this vibratory alchemy with spiritual bypassing. In a state of high vibration, the clarity and purity of the vibration is felt. It is not tainted by inner conflict or an attempt to conceal the truth of one's experience. So someone who habitually denies all of their genuine pain by controlling themselves through yogic practices, for instance, is not in a truly high vibration, for they are signaling a message of denial and dissonance. Even though on the outside, they may appear as the enlightened Buddha under the Bodhi tree, their vibratory essence will reveal their true state of being. Awakening is not a pretty experience. And attaining enlightenment requires for us to have first shed the light of consciousness to the darkness of our unconsciousness, to every shadow, every crevice of our mind and memory. The pain is a portal to heal. And by genuinely feeling the pain, being with the pain, and expressing the truth of one's experience, the vibration becomes pure and is able to inspire authenticity in others. There are only two paths, truth and lie. And it is through truth that we heal, the individual and the collective. So if it is important for us to recognize our thoughts, it is equally important for us to listen to our senses, which are able to communicate to us the vibratory essence of everything. And contrary to popular belief, we are capable of sensing truth as a visceral, felt experience. We are all living, breathing lie detectors by our very nature. Some people speak of clairvoyance as a rare breed of people with exceptional skills, although this is simply the nature of our sight in full expression, in full embodiment. Every one of our five senses include a spiritual counterpart, a higher dimension of the sense. For example, many people describe experiencing the truth chills, when the body responds to a statement in literal resonance, a vibration signaling a core knowing that truth is being spoken. When we're in the presence of a lie, on the other hand, the vibratory field can be felt through a sense of confusion. So intellect alone is incapable of discovering truth, for it lacks the wholeness of intuition and the wisdom of spirit. Therefore, the artificial intellect, too, is incapable of discovering truth, and it can never even come close to the potentiality of our consciousness that we inhabit. But our truth discovery potentiality turns in on itself if we continuously code our consciousness with the vibratory field of lies. If we allow our discernment to become distorted with a constant stream of self-deception and override the guiding voice of a higher self with doubt and mental speculation, we will mute our natural senses of truth discovery. The more we lie to ourselves and the more we consume the lies of others, the less able we are to discern right from wrong, truth from lie. And this is why the people who see the truth of this COVIDian takeover are those who don't watch the television or listen to the actors standing on the government podiums. Their perception is more free to read the vibratory field of reality as it is, because it's not filled with the distorting projections of the social engineers. The fourth principle of natural law is polarity. Everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites. Extremes meet, all paradoxes can be reconciled. This is perhaps the most important tool for healing. Firstly, it requires clarity of senses and clarity of thought. So we are able to accurately read the nature of things and recognize the scale, aspect, dimension, and degree of what we are examining. For instance, we can look at sound. Can you tell where silence ends and sound begins? Isn't what we may call silence actually filled with sound? Are we merely talking about varying degrees of the same thing? What about cold and heat, sharp and dull, short and tall? Everything is defined by its place on a continuum based on the conditions held in the mind of the observer and based on the knowable scale. The principle of polarity can therefore feel a bit of a mind bender, for it stretches into infinity, and we can only observe that which is knowable for us. But let's go into the world of emotions and behavior and see how we may use the principle of polarity there. Let's examine aggression. We have expressive and overt aggression, as well as internal and passive aggression. Although they may appear to be two different things, they are the same thing in different degrees. On a scale, we may observe aggression as an aspect of the behavior to asserting one's boundaries. Anger is a communication that a boundary has been crossed. On one extreme, there is the uncontrolled expression of anger coming out as rage. And on the other extreme, there is such a controlled inhibiting of anger that it implodes and it acts like acid being poured inside. The first extreme clearly communicates a boundary, but also creates a host of other problems, as rage often comes with words or acts, which can cause destruction and harm. The other extreme does not manage to communicate the boundary at all, and thus it is guaranteed that the boundaries will continue to be crossed and more toxic passive aggression will be harbored in the future also. To establish equilibrium, to reconcile these extremes, we apply the external control of the imploding pole to the uncontrollable expression of the exploding pole. And we can arrive at a place in the middle where we can express our anger and communicate our boundaries without unleashing the rage or swallowing up the poison. This is anger in balance. This is inner mastery. How can we apply the principle of polarity to the current crisis with wisdom? There is one scale where everyone stands, regardless of their response to the pandemic. This is something that my friend and colleague, Ed Gilbert, former police officer who established Police for Freedom in Australia, shared with me after many months of working to find common ground with everyone in the midst of this conflict. The common ground is safety. So the vast plethora of the COVID responses are all different degrees of securing safety on a scale of insecurity. One extreme of responses to insecurity would be a desperate need to seek for an external authority, to clutch onto the rules and regulations and restrictions of the government. The other extreme would be such profound lack of trust in external structures and guidelines that one has ceased to put their trust into any kind of leader or anyone at all, even humanity in general. So their way to secure safety in an insecure situation would be to not listen to anyone and to not follow any external guidance, not to lean on any other human being. Again, both responses are harmful. The first one has totally lost themselves and blindly trusts others. And the second one has lost all trust in others and thus only relies on oneself, which had made them disconnected from the community. Neither of these extreme responses create a balanced and healthy field of safety. Safety is the equilibrium which is achieved only by overcoming the extremes of insecurity. Safety would be that middle point after both poles have been made to meet and the harmful aspects of both responses have been let go of. So a healthy field of safety would be when one is able to rely on others for security without losing oneself. One would have a healthy level of mistrust, not being gullible so that one's fears could not be exploited, but also be able to trust their fellow man, fellow human, when they have earned it in order to build a community of people who can truly be there for them in times of need. As this principle embodies also the truth about paradoxes, I must point out the paradox of this principle. There are things which do not come in scales. Truth is one of them. There are no varying degrees of truth. Yes, there are different aspects of truth, different levels of truth, but there are no different degrees of truth. Truth is a force unto its own. Something either is or isn't true. There are different perceptions of reality which exist simultaneously, different experiences of the same event, but there is only one objective truth, the ultimate reality, that which has happened or is currently happening now, that which is. And this is why truth resides in the realm of Christ. It is unbreakable, immutable, and eternal. The fifth principle of natural law is rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. Rhythm is essentially mercy in creation. It is the force which seeks to bring things into balance, to bring things into equilibrium. It is the opportunity which ascertains that we have the possibility to reflect and to learn every time we visit the same circumstance. It is the ripple of the impact, looking to soothe our mood and to correct our path. Rhythm wants to make sure that nobody strays from one's purpose and nature too far. For the further we deviate, the harder the fall, in order to teach us the golden middle way. We can observe this principle in effect right now. The more the class of dominators are tightening their grip, the more obvious becomes their tyranny. The more workers are being fired for not taking the needle, the more people we have now able to dedicate all of their time for this sacred cause, to defend humanity. So what is the principle of rhythm asking of us? To have faith. To know that no conflict lasts forever. That every roaring sea finally finds stillness. This is simply the nature of this universe through the principle of rhythm. The sixth principle of natural law is cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. The teaching of this principle is for us to comprehend the causes of the effects we are living right now. It is also showing us that the manifested reality is simply our own aggregate creation. This is the science of change. Rather than remaining an eternal victim of the effects we ourselves have brought into being, we can become the cause, the positive cause. One of the most obvious examples of this principle is what I already touched upon earlier when we examined the law of correspondence, domination of the animal kingdom. Have you noticed the similarities of how the domesticated and so-called production animals are being treated, and what kind of immoral practices are now being imposed on humanity? Forced injections, forced microchips, forced vaccine passports, forced isolation, separation of families, forced euthanasia or outright murder, and not to mention the devouring of the flesh of these exploited beings. Have you ever heard of Soylent Green? Have you heard of the plans to use human body remains to make a bio-sludge to be used as a fertilizer? Have you heard of how the tissues of aborted human fetuses are being used in the food flavoring industry? How far is this abomination going to go? The law of cause and effect will guarantee that whatever we do to our animal kin, to our little feathered, furry, and scaled brethren, will be done to us as well. This is an indisputable truth written in the fibers of this universe. 2,500 years ago, already Pythagoras stated this fact with the words, "For as long as man continues to be the ruthless destroyer of lower living beings, he will never know health or peace. For as long as men massacre animals, they will kill each other. Indeed, he who sows the seeds of murder and pain cannot reap joy and love." The seventh principle of natural law is gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. The masculine and feminine principles are not identities, preferences, or sexes. They are elements of the forces of creation, without which creation would be impossible, whether physical, mental, or spiritual creation. This is incredibly important for us to comprehend now as the agents of change. Yes, the soil of our minds must be fertile with the waters of truth and love. But if we do not put our thoughts into action, the tree of our life lacks the fruit. And without the fruit, there is no seed to bring forth the tree for the next generations. The masculine principle is the will that enacts. Similarly, we must also express the feminine principle within us, the force that receives, the force that unites, the force that takes something in and performs the miracle of creation. The principle of gender is always present in creation, generation, and regeneration. So let us actively express and receive and bring together the elements which will create the new earth that we all envision. I'm almost out of time, but I cannot leave you without introducing the lost principle, the one that brings all principles to life and which binds everything together. The natural law teacher, Mark Passio, calls it care. It is the desire, the electricity, the impulse, which precedes conscious thought, which awakens the will and the series of acts to create, to manifest. Care is the cosmic spark of creation. It is time for us to truly own the spark, become the spark. Let us care so much about the sacred heart of humanity and the freedom of our children and their children, that we fuel the spark into a flame so vivid, so bright, that it lights the path for all the lost souls to come back home, back to love, back to humanity. Thank you for taking this journey with me. And to continue on the path of the peace activist, I invite you on my course, which you can find on my website at hennamaria.community. Much love and strength to you all.